If you're familiar with the computer animated web series RWBY, you likely exist in one of two camps. Either you love the show a whole lot, or you see it as a great punching bag. Currently, I exist in that second category, but that wasn't always the case. I used to really like the show. It was creative, fun, had entertaining characters, and great fights. And while the visuals were flawed, it was part of its charm. But that was like 6 years ago. It has long since been told that ever since Volume 3, with Monty Oom's tragic passing, the show has been getting worse and worse with each volume. And as someone who rather recently had to sit through every volume in succession over the course of about 2 weeks, it's very apparent just how awful it gets compared to those first few volumes. But I want to talk about something specifically that gets bad. For me, the biggest problem with the show that made it unwatchable, that made me want to quit several times throughout my viewing, was the fact that Team RWBY is unlikable. No, wait, sorry, that's too nice. They're very hateable. Let me explain why, but to do so properly, I need to start at the beginning. Enter 2013, where Rooster Teeth teased and subsequently premiered their original anime-inspired web series, RWBY. It was a hit, and partly the reason was because it had a likable cast of characters. To tease the series, the team released several trailers named after the colors of the cast: red for Ruby, white for Weiss, black for Blake, and yellow for Yang. The visual style seemed to emphasize the importance of color, and it was intriguing and fun, as the trailers gave the audience good tidbits of the characters' personalities. When the series premiered, it felt like they were following through on a promise. Ruby, the series' main character, acted as the excited, wide-eyed innocent who wanted to be a huntress and save people just like her mother. It's a trope we've seen before, but the energy of the animation and admittedly enjoyable voice acting from Lindsay Jones, who strangely became more high-pitched as the series progressed, made Ruby likable and fun. She bounced off of her fellow cast members, both literally and figuratively, but it never felt grating. And I feel it's because she showed promise as a fighter. She could back up the energy with genuine skill. Following her was Weiss, the one who follows the rich girl trope. Unlike Ruby, I feel like she wasn't nearly as effective, as there were times I just didn't really like her too much. But it did work to her advantage. Being a bit snootier, she has more chance to grow, and tossing her into a team like RWBY gave her that chance. And for a while, she had some pretty solid character growth that made cheering for her feel right, as well as some good scenes here and there. Next is Blake, who is much more mysterious than the others, being the ninja of the group. There was a definite intrigue about her character, unanswered questions of why she was a shut-in and hiding so much. Being a shut-in, her growth was about overcoming that and getting closer with her team, which benefited all of them and allowed the characters to grow together. And finally, Yang. Yang in the first few volumes is what modern Knuckles wishes he could be, the great comedic relief who packs a punch. With cheesy but charming puns and a really cool weapon at her disposal, she was one of my favorites for a while, and she seemed to be a fan favorite as well. While she didn't necessarily have as much chance to grow as a character, as she wasn't really given an arc, she filled the role of the fun older sister, as a guide for Ruby and potentially the other girls as well, being the oldest. All of these tropes and the situation they found themselves in allowed them to grow together. Looking back, it's a brilliant setup, with a lot of potential to be something truly great. Keyword there is potential, because boy did things go downhill. As of Volume 8, which is the last one I saw, and ever will see, every single great aspect I mentioned about these characters is gone. Each and every single one of them is garbage. Let's start with Ruby's descent. For a while, Ruby really didn't have too much growth as a character. Pyrrha's death and the fall of Beacon should have acted as an eye-opener for her, showing the optimistic Ruby that the world is a lot harsher than expected, doesn't live up to the ideals in the stories. In other shows, these kinds of moments have been brilliant for characters, setting them on new paths, some expected but still entertaining, while others were risky but rewarding for the audience. But Ruby doesn't change. Rather, she seems to double down on that aspect of being the hero. And that might not sound like a bad thing, but the way it's presented and the way the show goes about certainly makes it a bad thing. She doesn't learn from her experiences, from her defeats, instead still choosing to charge in with the idea that she can save everyone. But now she doesn't have the skill to back it up. She showed promise as a fighter, and that's why her early optimism never felt grating. But there wasn't much to prove. Here, she doesn't need to be just kinda good. She needs to be really, really good. And she isn't. In early volumes, she just charges into combat like a hero who just got some big power up. But she just ends up getting in the way. And I know I said defeats, but as the volumes progress, those defeats fade away, and not because she gets stronger. In fact, it never feels at all like she gets all that better as the show goes on. She is thrown in the position of leader, and with that, the show just treats her as a character who's always right, even when she's not. The plot basically bends itself backwards to make her right in the later volumes. Her conflict with Ironwood should have doomed most of the world, but instead they find Deus Ex Machina and suddenly she's right again. And while on the subject of Ironwood, he was right, and his conflict between him and RWBY really proves why RWBY is a terrible, terrible leader. She makes just about every single wrong decision possible, and she's incredibly hypocritical, as she gets mad that Ironwood is withholding stuff from them, while they withhold very valuable and important information from Ironwood for no good reason. It's supposed to be this classic battle between the idealist and the realist, the only problem being that the realist, Ironwood, definitely has the experience to fit his side, but the idealist, RWBY, doesn't have the power for her side, so it feels like her plan is just suicide, meaning one plan looks like it'll work, the other won't, but they favor the one that won't. The worst part of her character is that she simply does not learn. There is no growth, no interesting change. She is a child who thinks she's right, and the world basically makes her right. It never proves her wrong, or at least she never thinks it proves her wrong. There isn't even the idea that she gets stronger as a fighter, as I said before. RWBY in Volume 8 only seems slightly stronger and slightly more experienced than she was in Volume 1. Weiss's decline is less drastic. Her character goes through roller coasters of ups and downs, with certain volumes giving her great character growth, and others just making her irritating. She has this unearned sense of confidence, since she loses every fight that isn't against Grimm, and the show never really plays with this like others do with their rich girl tropes. Oftentimes, they'll be humbled and go through their own self-reflection, at least if the rich girl is the main character. But Weiss doesn't do that. Rather, her conflict is with her family. Her rejection of her father and the obvious fact that her family is in shambles is admittedly rather interesting for a bit, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Weiss and her father are really only able to interact for one season, and they can't do it anymore since he's now dead. Weiss just feels like a counterpart of RWBY, so her decline as a character just ties with RWBY's. While there are places for her character to go, it just feels like they're being ignored, or only done halfway. But the worst part is the promise of a good character. Like I said, some volumes are great for her. Now, rewatching Volume 4 and 5, I feel like there are some potentially interesting things for her to do, but she fucks it up. They tried making tension in the Volume 5 finale by pretending to kill Weiss like they did Pyrrha, but watching it again, she's basically just pushed to being useless by attempting to summon at every single point, putting herself in danger. And while on that topic, Weiss's fighting style is a really cool one. It's cinematic, her weapon cycles through different types of dust, and while she has a preference to ice, she can use a whole variety of them for interesting elemental combat. Too bad that's all forgotten once she can summon, and that's basically all she does after that. Sure, it's probably stronger, but RWBY as a show was praised for its unique fights. And when you take away the unique fighting style of one of the characters, and replace it with the token summoner without giving her any of the really interesting bits of being a summoner, it just feels like it's going back on one of its greatest aspects. If you take away one of the best things about the show, what is left? Well, anyway, next we have Blake. Remember how I said there was intrigue about her? Lots of unanswered questions that could have been super interesting? Well, turns out those answers are boring. Or even don't make any sense at all. The past she had with the White Fang seems interesting, but they fuck it up. They turn Adam from a driven, violent, but fascinating leader with complexity to the crazy ex-boyfriend who's not interesting at all. He just stalks Blake and acts like an abusive ex, but not in a way that would make him interesting, or even make her interesting. That's one potentially cool character idea thrown in the trash. The other element of her character was learning to embrace those around her, to stop running away and fight. It's told audibly and visually, since her power is to create a clone to take the damage or act as a distraction. Her literal power is to run away. Honestly, it's a great setup. Well, she basically figures out how to do this in like Volume 6, when she kills Adam. She stands her ground, fights alongside Yang, and defeats her past. In a scene that could have been way better than it actually was, if any of the 3 characters involved felt more ingrained in the moment. Their connections are all loose at best, and for such a big scene, it feels dull. And after that, Blake is a nothing character. She has nothing to do, nothing to say, nowhere to go. She isn't given any kind of character arc. She's just Yang's sort of girlfriend. Of the 4, she is the least offensive, because it's hard to hate a character that's barely even a character anymore. She's just along for the ride. Maybe she says a few lines and she fights a bit, but that's it. But finally, we have Yang, the character who used to be one of my favorites. She was fun, silly, and strong, and, well, all that's gone, because now she's a bitch. All of those great moments of Yang making the audience laugh with cheesy puns and a can-do smile are gone for someone who's mopey, angry, and never fun. The end of Volume 3 gives her a great place to go, after losing an arm, and elements of her growth in 4 build upon this, but they're so rushed, and they're done in just a few episodes, if even. And how interesting would it have been if Yang was still learning to get over her past trauma? Maybe she still hesitated, or even had scenes talking with RWBY about how she feels losing an arm, or scenes with anyone. But no, she gets over it super fast, very unrealistically, then acts like the token badass again, until she meets her mom. Then bitch Yang is all we get. Every previous, interesting element of her character is gone. From here on, Yang doesn't even feel like RWBY's sister. She feels cold towards RWBY, not even acting as a guide or friend to her. At one point, she gets separated from RWBY and Blake over a disagreement, and when Jean confronts them and says he's sure RWBY will forgive Yang, Yang, under her breath, reveals she was talking about Blake forgiving her, not RWBY, her new girlfriend over her lifetime sister. Now, I know a lot of people really want Bumblebee to happen, but I'm sorry, you're all fucking wrong. This pairing actively makes both characters worse. First off, they share no chemistry at all. Hell, they share the least amount of chemistry of anyone in the group, since Blake abandons Yang after she loses her arm, and Yang clearly shows resentment towards her in Volume 4. Well, now they're sort of gay, and they don't do anything interesting with it. Blake is just Yang's girlfriend, and Yang is the bitchy one who forgets about everyone except for Blake. It just feels like Blake went from one toxic relationship to another. If you want a gay romance, have a good gay romance. Fucking RWBY and Weiss makes more sense. But whatever, I'm getting a little off track, and my head hurts. Almost everything Yang says, post Volume 5, is nothing like how she was before. It doesn't feel organic, like she slowly became bitter. It just happens. She becomes absolutely unlikable with no redeeming qualities to her. And the worst part about all of this, about all of these characters changing for the worse, is that the writers don't seem to notice. They're even actively trying to make the audience think Team RWBY is correct when they're oftentimes not. Neither the characters nor the writers are learning from the past. No, I lied. The worst part about all of this is how the show RWBY has become a first for me. It is the first show I've ever watched where I want the villains to win. Every villain, even Cinder with her poor backstory and losing streak, are more likable than the main 4 characters. When the show fails that badly on accident, you know someone really fucked up, or a bunch of someones. Even when the writers try making the villains more unlikable, a lot of audience members still agree with the villain, because the hero still isn't right. Every horrid problem with the show stems from the decline of the main cast, the characters the show is fucking named after. And that's why I, and many others like me, have dropped the show for good, because the writers aren't going to improve, and neither are the characters. All I can say is I hope Salem wins. If you guys enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. Also make sure to click the bell so that way you're notified for future videos. And if you really want to support me, you can buy my book on Amazon. Link is in the description. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.